Welcome, everybody, to the developer event with Lucky8, where we're going to ask him a few questions about his background and about the things he's been building on Chia. Lucky8 is a great developer who has worked on multiple things, such as the royalty split puzzle and most recently the fusion puzzle. He also has a number of other active projects inside of the Chia ecosystem that we'll be touching on throughout the event. And Lucky8, first and foremost, thank you for taking the time to discuss with us today. Anybody in the audience who does want to ask questions, please use the Zoom Q&A section, or inside of our Discord, use the community feedback channel as well. You can post your questions in there, and I'll make sure that Lucky8 gets asked them. So Lucky8, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. And just to get things started, can you describe a bit about your background, what led you to embrace crypto, and kind of what brought you over to Chia?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this today. I think it'll be a great chat. Um, I'd like to think I don't look old enough for some of the things I'm going to tell you, but the mirror tells me otherwise. I've been a long time programmer. I started at about 10. I would say cypherpunk adjacent, mostly as a lurker. Uh, the /BBS era was definitely part of my comeuppance, I guess, into the space. Got to see a lot of really interesting things to develop that affected this space. Watched the 40-bit encryption wars and the turmoil with PGP, um, which is a really cool tie-in to see Gene leading the company, knowing that history. Um, I would say almost as soon as I began developing software, it had a heavy emphasis on distributed systems. Uh, it's very, very rare that I've ever written anything where I just open a program and it does some things and closes. It's almost always network interfaces and dependencies on external systems, and whether that's web up to multi-tier enterprise systems with really complex architecture. Distributed systems has been a huge part of it. So kind of in the larger, I guess, space of distributed systems, um, I got to see more and more as my career developed in software, poorly designed critical business systems that were running on weak protocols and clear text. Also, the systems had really weak concepts of identity. And when they did realize that they had a need for plugging holes, getting past clear text, the first thing was to jump to pre-shared keys, symmetrical encryption, and all the associated challenges that go with that. I guess looking at the larger space of what was happening in the world, as I was getting into my career years, we went through the 2008 bank crisis with the instability in economic markets, lots of noise around derivatives tradings, the idea coming up that there's so many derivatives of derivatives we don't even know what exists. When things were collapsing, they were talking about how it would take years just to figure out what the actual losses were. So I guess in that broader context of my career and what was going on in the economy, I unfortunately missed the initial launch of Bitcoin. I'd say I probably heard of it in about 2011 for the first time, in earnest. I'm sure I'd seen mentions to it. At first, the very first thing I remember is it sounded like some sort of trading of video game currency. It didn't feel like a real thing. But fortunately, during the 2017 boom, I started paying more attention to it. My younger brother started buying crypto on Coinbase, and I was a little bit curious why he was doing that. For him, I think it was mainly about flipping and just FOMO. But I got deep into some of the culture and reading about Bitcoin and the arguments for it, kind of recognizing that the importance of the ledger as actually a primary role even over money itself. That money is just a story about value transfer. And so the ledger is really the prime entity there. So I bought into a lot of that, and I didn't completely miss Bitcoin mining, but I got to the point where I was pool mining 2 cents a month at a cost of $3. So I didn't do that for very long, but I did get into Ethereum mining until we approached the merge, and concerns about centralization and just miners not having any role going forward kind of made me look at what else was around. And fortunately, I stumbled across an article shortly after mainnet launch in 2021 about Chia. I don't think it was even one of the positive articles about Chia, but I'm used to reading between the lines, I guess, with mainstream reporting of technology developments. So I started farming in 2021. Got my first block in April of 2021, and have been at it ever since, in some sense or another, and I guess quite a few senses actually.
Mhm. Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. And certainly an interesting perspective to go from the cybersecurity world and jump into the crypto world and see how keys are handled so drastically differently. Definitely an interesting perspective there for sure. Now, I want to dive a little bit more into you finding out about Chia and what led you to develop on it. You mentioned, you farmed your first block in April of 21. What kind of made you change from being a farmer to wanting to be a developer?
Well, I think getting into the consensus and understanding the programming model, just conceptually, I realized there was something really special here. And like a lot of people, I think I was expecting it to go parabolic sooner. But I realized that the community was small, and to get involved would require me to, I guess, to push it forward would require me and a lot of other people to advocate for it, to share information, to create tutorials, to write issues, and just start to contribute back in various ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we're going to talk a lot more about the different things you've already built on Chia, but a little bit more focused is some of the different puzzles you've built utilizing Chia Lisp. And we have a question from one of the audience members as to how did you learn Chia Lisp? Can you recommend resources or techniques for learning? And how do you think critically about what can be done to do it within Chia Lisp?
Well, Chia Lisp is tricky to learn, uh, not necessarily because the language is hard, but because the Chia specific blockchain concepts are a lot to learn in one time. Um, I would actually say that starting with a thorough understanding of the coin set model introduced by Chia is kind of primary importance. Uh, the way I've explained it before is Chia Lisp doesn't do much, but it enables everything. It's a really simplistic language, and primarily what you're thinking about the whole time you're working with it is, what coins do I have? Where do I want them allow them to go? Where do I not want to allow them to go? And how do I want to observe kind of those state transitions and protect against invalid ones. So in terms of resources, I digested just about all the Chia YouTube videos I could find on Chia Lisp. There's a few still on the Chia project channel. A tutorial. There's a really good 4-part tutorial that escapes me right now, but it was on the concept of the piggy bank. That was one of the most, I guess, absorbable pieces of information I found. I like to read a lot more than I like to watch videos because I can pause, I can backtrack and reread over something. I can sit there and think about it. I don't feel like I'm getting left behind by videos. So definitely the docs on chia.net, the various videos that are out there. I'm looking at your question again. So how do I think critically about what can be done? I think the big thing is to take a mindset that the happy path of accomplishing what you need to do is pretty straightforward. But there's lots and lots of places where you could inadvertently make mistakes. And the two big risks that you're always kind of looking out for is how do I avoid bricking my coins, meaning they can't go anywhere? And how do I avoid leaving the coins more open than they need to be? And a lot of that comes to keeping up with the latest chips and documentation on best practices for announcements and assertions and just kind of defensive programming techniques.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much. And I certainly recommend that process as well. I know when I started learning Chia Lisp, I also went through that piggy bank example, and that was a great one written up by Quexington. And there's also a tutorial overview of that on our doc site. Side note on it, there was actually a bug identified in that puzzle, as I'm sure you're aware, and it was that flash loan from God, essentially the concept that the piggy bank had a escape spend that was based on the amount inside of the piggy bank. So essentially, I have to save up X amount before I can distribute it. And the flash loan from God was essentially faking that all of the funds, all those funds were in there. There have been some community developers who have rewritten that puzzle to negate that issue as well. And I know that you had looked into that as also. But now that we kind of understand your process when you are getting into Chia Lisp and thinking about it critically, I'd like to get a little bit more into different things that you've developed on Chia, and not just the puzzles that you built out, but also feel free to take the time to go through some of your NFT projects and some of your other side projects that you've been working on also.
Sure. Yeah, the very first thing I did that I guess could broadly fit into the development category, and I cheated a little bit, I'll admit it. I used the Chives website to issue the LKY8 Lucky8 token days after, I guess, the cat 1 standard opened up. And what I decided to do with that was make it a sort of reward coin for solving challenges in the Chia ecosystem. Some of them were technical, like a programming challenge that you could unlock a coin that I pointed out to where it was. Some of them were more like advanced user things, like figuring out how to unwrap a mnemonic that I had encoded in something else. And then some of them were just silly things like web-based puzzles in like the traditional sense, like jigsaw puzzles or crosswords or various other ways. And I did a lot of giveaways where I would randomly drop coin offers for 1 mojo. And we had a lot of enthusiastic people get involved in that. Also had some I'm not even sure what you would call it. They were like challenges, but they were like coin accumulation challenges. I got the idea from King Leonidas from the 300. Basically, figure out some sort of prize and then make an offer that the other side of that was a whole bunch of obscure coins, maybe some of them which hadn't even been traded in the wild. You could see them on Tail database, but you might have to ask around and poke people and try to figure out who was behind it and try to trade for something so you could win the prize. So I did a lot of that kind of stuff and just being active in the space. A lot of people wanted to know, what are we going to do with these Lucky8 tokens? And I came up with this concept with admittedly very terrible art of 8hackers.xch, which was this super limited 8 NFT collection that represented sort of personas within the ecosystem, not people necessarily, but old crotchety programmer and young hipster programmer, and I named them all. I gave them all unique accessories, and the idea was each person with 888,888 Lucky8 tokens could trade for one of those. So did a lot of just fun stuff in the space, but eventually I created a Bram character. He was the last one released for the 8hackers.xch collection, and the 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 idea with him was to separate him from the other kind of existing 7 members of the group. The team who solved one particular challenge, and I actually thought originally it was going to be an individual, but the individual who solved one particular challenge was going to be able to earn the royalties perpetually if that was ever transferred. So you might guess that that ended up, the challenge was a little difficult, and people pulled the resources, and we ended up with a group of 8 people involved with that. So if you ever get the high-res version of the Bram 8hackers.xch NFT up in Mint Garden, you get to the raw view. If you zoom in on the hoodie that he's wearing, there is the group of people who call themselves the Lucky8 Wolf Pack, and we have some sort of permanent representation of them in the image. I think Brant's probably one of the few people that's still rocking the original PFP. But that was why I set up the original split royalty puzzle, so those individuals could share in the rewards of any future transfers of that NFT. And that evolved a little bit. Ace Vale from Mint Garden came up with a pretty similar puzzle, and he was looking to use it for the Mint Garden minting. So we kind of compared notes and looked at drawbacks his had and drawbacks mine had, kind of made a new combined puzzle, and went through the chip 0008 process on that, and kind of got that standardized. I later created splitxch.com, which is a way to programmatically create those through a web UI and deploy them to the blockchain, and just observe and kind of kick them to execute them. There's no trust required. The recipients are all built into the puzzle on chain. So when I say kick them, I really just mean say go, and it goes and does the thing it's always going to do, and those coins switch hands through the blockchain that way. I learned a ton through that. XCH was pretty easy, but I also built cat support for that, and that was probably my earliest deep foray into the mysteries of Chia puzzles, because there's a lot that goes on in cats and NFTs that's not superficially known to you and obvious when you're using the UI, the wallet to do something. And it's really a pretty amazing system. And like the more I did with it, the more I just kind of fell for the design and the design decisions that had gone into making Chia Lisp and the Chia blockchain. Just really fascinating stuff from a deep technical perspective. And I've said a lot. I'm trying to remember the full context of what you wanted me to talk about there.
Yeah, no, you're well on track. And I just want to add in a note here. Lucky8 and I have been working together outside of my role in CNI. So some of these things that Lucky8 is mentioning, I'm also involved in some other capacity outside of my role in CNI. So like being part of the 8 hackers group, that was obviously a personal project that I was involved in. And I know that was a really exciting one. And you took a lot of time to make sure even the little whirly gig that Bram has in the background of his videos was animated and set up in that GIF, and that was a really fun project. And I think you're spot on. We're really going through all of your different projects. We've touched on your initial token launch. We went through the NFT collections that you have launched as well, or the initial ones. And then we also started talking about the royalty split puzzle. And if you don't mind taking a little bit more time to describe kind of what happens with that royalty split puzzle and why is it so powerful?
Sure. As you know, in an NFT mint, you have the ability to define a royalty address, which is always enforced when an offer happens and NFT changes hands using kind of the standard Chia offer mechanics and means of economic exchange. I guess it always enforces those royalties. Um, so a lot of projects were coming into it, and they had an artist and a web guy and some community Discord managers, and nobody wanted to get rug pulled, and they didn't really know each other in real life. And they were like, well, how can we make sure that these efforts that we put in are kind of rewarded perpetually going forward? And all those recipients are basically encoded into the blockchain into a puzzle through a process called currying. And that creates a unique address that can only ever go to those people. So when that is used as either an NFT royalty address or a pool farming reward address or pretty much any other type of XCH address you can come up with, as soon as the coins are written there, they're pre-committed to going to only those destinations and only those proportions that they were specified when that was created. So there's a lot of decentralization, a lot of trustless things there. I know in the context of split XCH, a lot of people asked, well, what if you go away? And I said, well, here's the open source project. You go and you create a cron job with your parameters to the Python command, and it runs perpetually. I'm very committed to the Chia ecosystem, so I'm going to do everything I can to keep that running perpetually. But you always have to think about the bus factor and the fact that we're all only here for a limited amount of time, and we're building things on the decades and generations order in some cases.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just to re-emphasize how powerful that is, it essentially makes it so that instead of that one address, you now have a series of addresses that those can go to. And with cascading royalty split puzzles, it's nearly infinite. And I'm thoroughly amazed. I always love all the puzzles that you write, and I know that's kind of one of the other things I wanted to mention today is you've not just worked on this royalty split puzzle, which had some collaboration with Acevale, but you've also written a couple of other puzzles that are in use or in development on the chain, such as the fusion puzzle, and then also a fun wrapper code for an auto burn offer solution. Do you mind touching on those a little bit?
Sure. So for the Monkey Zoo ecosystem, it's always been a big part of Tim Youngman's vision to create kind of a gamification of NFT assets and combine them and put them together in unique ways, kind of a personalization um, aspect, like a build your own avatar, but beyond that, possibly going into 3D game modeling and things like that. So uh, he had this amazing idea to take all these various Monkey Zoo NFT lines that have come through. I can't even remember how many collections are. I want to say it's like 7 or 8 collections by now, and be able to compose them together and take a hat from this guy and the pants from this guy and the background from this other guy and make this new asset. And we wanted to do it with on-chain permanence and provenance. And there's been a lot of efforts through the chip 15 process to create good metadata for this and just make it kind of a repeatable pattern that could be used to put together NFTs. And the other requirement we came up with is that the other side of it, after you put a bunch of things together, you're free to take them back apart perpetually, as well as recursively fuse different things in a multi-generational way. And so that was a really fun and challenging project from the Chia Lisp and the Python driver perspective. One of the closely related projects was the auto burn that Brant mentioned. And that was to take the very first generation of Monkey Zoo NFTs, the NFT one special edition monkeys, and give them the ability to be MZ token yielding and do a 1-for-1 swap where the original could automatically be disposed of in the burn address as soon as you accepted it. So it's an interesting extension of kind of the game theory stuff in that there was a will they or won't they point in time where everybody was wondering whether people would choose to keep their original or they'd go for the one with yield. And just been a lot of really fun projects like that. I've also worked on a lot of odds and ends things, and I can definitely go into that more if there's interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we do have a question from one of the community members asking, what are you hoping to build next? So that might tie into some of these odds and ends as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk about a couple of the things I've already built, and then I'll definitely answer that question. So in my open source repo, and I can share that later on X if you follow me and make sure that gets out there. I'm at Lucky8 token on X. I've built some things like wallet cleanup scripts to deal with high derivation indexes, where basically it compacts everything back down to your first address if you decided that you'd rather have faster, easier syncs rather than privacy. Definitely a decision that some people make. I've built some experimental puzzles around time-locked vaults, not at the level of complexity of like the Chia custody, but I experimented with this idea that what if certain people were to put high value NFTs from popular collections into a time lock voluntarily, like what might that do to the perceived kind of value of the collection and just interest. I had a lot of spin out ideas that I haven't fully explored on that, like yielding time locks. But honestly, a lot of the stuff that I thought about there, my hesitance was less so about the technology and more so about trying to avoid anything that looked like an SEC target. But I've I've dabbled in a lot of different things on an experimental level. One of the things I'm hoping to build next, and by next probably down the road, but I'm still really interested in this idea of a mineable cat. I think there's kind of a perception that Chia farming, although it's easy, it's hard to get to anything at scale. And I had this idea of just creating a fun entry point to people who wanted to run a fully synced node and kind of have a lottery system built into a singleton so that they could mine cats at a certain rate dictated by the singleton. Basically have the having rules and distribution rules directly encoded into the singleton that anybody could spend, but they would have to abide by its restrictions. That's something I would still really like to do. I tend to have a lot of consulting engagements in this area too. I'm working on something in the real estate tokenization space, actually, that I'm really excited about and could be really interesting, I think, for a variety of stakeholders, whether it's serious investors or token degens or property owners. So something that I'm sure more will come out over time, but I've said about as much as I probably should say under my NDA on that. But pretty much always working on something in the Chia space. And it is a part-time hobby thing for me. So it doesn't always go as fast as I would like, but it's something that I'm pretty much consistently engaged in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I just want to reemphasize the breadth of your knowledge and how many different aspects of the Chia ecosystem you've touched on. You've been a creator, you've been a developer, you've been a trader, you've been a farmer, you've touched every aspect of it. And with all of that knowledge and information, what are your recommendations for key programming languages for developers to learn? And this kind of goes a little bit back to your point on Chia Lisp, and you might not necessarily need to learn Chia Lisp itself because there are all these other things you could learn. Is there a particular coding language that you would recommend?
So I think there's almost as many different ways you could go about that as there are people on the Chia blockchain doing development. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of different approaches there. One that I think is really good to get started, I'm going to call it bring your own language. The Chia wallet and the Chia full node both offer pretty expressive RPC APIs to do various things that are of interest to you. I think that many people have found that using things that are already available in the Chia blockchain GitHub in combination with RPC APIs, they've been able to do a lot of really interesting things on Chia without ever touching Chia Lisp. I think it's awesome that we have Chia Lisp, and I think there's definitely subsets of problems in the space that are only solved by writing your own Chia Lisp. There's also an amazing amount of just plumbing code in Python and Rust and those RPC APIs to honestly be able to build interesting things in Chia for months or years before you run out of tools, I guess. Um, Another thing that I think is really important to understand is the spin bundles and the Chia conditions language. When I was talking earlier about the programming challenges I did for the Lucky8 token, uh, one of them was to just be able to spend a weird coin that I had put into a weird password protected puzzle. And it was like a 3-step challenge because I created a list in IPFS of a bunch of candidate passwords for people to guess. But they had to figure out how to encode those passwords. They had to figure out how to call the spend of this unique puzzle, the unique cat coin, and ultimately those spin bundles and conditions are kind of the final product of everything you do in any sort of manipulation of a Chia Lisp program and associated coins. So just understanding what those capabilities are really important. And there are puzzles that exist where you can actually, like the delegate puzzle, where you can directly feed conditions in as long as your interaction with the coin is assigned spin, you could actually make it do things that it was never built to do just by using that extension point. And there's a ton of those in Chia. The design of Chia and the Chia Lisp language is just phenomenally powerful. It's not always obvious what's there for you to do, but if you ask people in the community, they're very, very generous with their time and very willing to give you pointers. And sometimes that pointer to a random document you've never come across or a blog is all you need to really kind of fully understand the concept and run with it yourself. So those are kind of some of the general kind of development approaches I would recommend. You'll never go wrong knowing some Rust and some Python when you're looking at the Chia blockchain code. I've been really interested to see that high performance Rust code start to replace several of the legacy code paths. But in any case, whether it's the Chia blockchain Rust code or Python code or Chia Lisp, one thing that's always served me well as a developer is just reading things that are complicated and really trying to gain a deep understanding of what they're doing. It's just like engineers study buildings and bridges, and artists study works of art, and that's one of the best ways I've seen to just grow my skill set is to deeply explore things that people far smarter or far more experienced than me have put together. So I definitely recommend that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the perfect segue is, we see all of these big brains, we see all of these huge things happening on chain, but obviously there's difficulties still. And even someone like yourself who has experience across it all has run into some of those issues and some of those difficulties. But what do you foresee are the biggest obstacles for developing on Chia, whether it be coding language, whether it be resources? What do you see as the biggest obstacles?
Well, I think ultimately understanding the constraints and requirements to spend coins efficiently and safely is like it's kind of the largest problem, but I think addressing that could come from many different paths. We could create additional training materials. We could get the knowledge of all the best practices out to more people. We could start to create higher order abstractions where the perhaps an IDE starts to understand more of what you're trying to accomplish and understand some of those best practices and guides you. Um, I know that there are already efforts to create higher level abstractions of languages that run directly against CLVM. I know Rigidity has a hobby project called Rue that takes some of the typing concepts and function style from various languages, um, and gives you a higher order programming concept. Uh, I think taking puzzles that were meant to be composed and kind of creating plumbing guides for composing them, I think would go long ways. There are several really interesting puzzles in Chia blockchain that I've enjoyed reading through. Um, I could kind of see the purpose of them, but didn't know how to actually use it for something myself. Um, One example of that is how the P2 delegate or hidden puzzle works. There's a hidden puzzle that is coded for, but by default in the wallet and kind of all known wallets, I guess, is that code path is curried in with a default value that will never work, which is good. There's no hidden path for your code for your coins to be spent without your knowledge. But I sense there's really interesting use cases that can be accomplished with that, and people haven't discovered. Uh, Similarly, one thing I've looked at recently, uh, the the fork activity on Chia kind of picked back up a little bit with the ABBA blockchain. Not an endorsement, but I think it's interesting. Um, and how the uh, pool rewards with the 7/8 reward for plot NFTs have a spin path that allows you to claim them back to a predetermined address if your pool after 7 days just doesn't do anything with them. Um, which I think is probably meant for like a defunct pool use case. If your pool just like went belly up and just abandoned everyone's coins and never split them out to the recipients. But it's really interesting to see how that was used to allow anyone on forks to do their plot NFTs claims after 7 days. And there's just a lot of really interesting nuggets like that in the Chia blockchain puzzles subdirectory. You could read them for days and days and still not have a sense of all the things you could do with them. But I think we'd eventually get to a point probably where we take that from the point where they're Legos to big brain people and adapt it so they're Legos to beginner and mediocre developers. So I think that's something that could be really interesting in this space.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's I think that's spot on. Building puzzles that are more composable and making that readily identifiable, the abstraction through Rue, the additional training, I think that's spot on. And just a Easter egg for anybody interested in that escape spend for pooling puzzles for the plot NFTs. Gene has made it known that there is actually another little fun hidden part of that. And it was part of the reason that the pool protocol was delayed that last week or two when it was being released. So that if somebody actually updates their consensus slightly on a fork or another chain, not only can they co-farm like they can now, but they can also claim those pool rewards within that 7 days. So something to dive into there if anybody's interested in puzzles and wants to learn more about how you can make that plot NFT even more robust with co-farming. That being said, we have one other question from one of the community members. We are getting close to the end of our event, so if anybody does have additional questions, please post them in the Zoom Q&A or use the community feedback channel inside of our Discord. And Lucky8, if you want me to answer this question, I can, just because it might be a little bit more applicable to me, but I'll let you take a stab at it here. Can you touch on the freedoms that Chip 15 provides?
I will definitely let you take a deep dive, but I'll give you an intro on that. The ability to descriptively identify a lot more characteristics of metadata on an NFT in a way that's strongly typed and well defined is really powerful for a lot of use cases.
I completely agree. And one of the reasons I was saying I might be a little bit more, a little closer to this one is I was the submitter of Chip 15. And this is before I started working with CNI. So this was one of my personal projects along with my company as well. And Chip 15, to put it simply, is the integration of the schema.org metadata standards directly into the data object of the Chia metadata. And the data object is something that's part of Chip 7, the standard metadata for NFTs on Chia. And that data object can now be expanded to include any form of metadata that is included in schema.org. Some of the initial recommendations were things like file type, because you actually did not, Chip 7 does not include a file type identifier. So being able to quickly identify, is this a PNG I'm loading up? Is this a GIF? Is this a zip file? How should I be handling it? Can now be done very easily and directly through Chip 15 through the recommendations on there. Also, like Lucky8 mentioned, a lot of these NFT projects have multiple creators. They don't just have one. Chip 7 and the on-chain metadata for NFTs includes that one creator via DID. With Chip 15, you can have all of the creators listed in there. Some of the use cases would be like the SIM card information for Tang Talk. Another use case would be for the fusion puzzle and including directly in the NFT's metadata what fusion puzzle it's associated with and what parts of different NFTs were combined together. So it adds a whole bunch of additional utility, plus it's future proof so that as additional metadata and additional standards are integrated into schema.org, you'll also have those within Chip 15. And so that's kind of the Chip 15 stuff. If anybody does have additional questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can definitely help you in that regard also. Now, we do have another one for you here, Lucky8. And where did the pseudonym Lucky8 originate?
I don't really know. I needed really it's a name from the cat project I created, but I didn't really have a clear use case for the cat when I created it. I was just trying to create a cat like everybody else did. There were way more of them, I think, in the cat 1 spec that didn't come through in the cat 2 migration. Everybody was doing it for a while. I was kind of interested in this concept. I had some good friends who were Asian, and they talked about it's kind of the significance of how 8 was lucky in their culture, and 4 was really unlucky. And I found this weird rabbit hole where people were trading in license plates to try to get a luckier license plate number. I don't know, just something about the whole concept just kind of intrigued me. I just wanted the token when I created it to kind of be just kind of a goodwill, send you some luck, send you some kindness. I don't know, just kind of a generic token. And I came up with that and I created 800, let's see, I created 8,888,888 of them, I think. And just kind of kept that pattern going with all the different giveaways and drops and things. So I don't, it's definitely not a name that I think really describes me. I think I mentioned one time on X that I don't really believe in luck. It's kind of almost an ironic name, but it just a fun thing, and I've kind of come to be known by that. I've actually thought about rebranding my X account to a closer representation of my in real world name, but I'd say my general reluctance to that is I do work in a cybersecurity space, and uh, not all of them are as amused by blockchain as I am. So kind of keep a low profile in that regard.
Yeah, completely understandable. Still a lot of stigma associated with the distributed ledger technologies, if you will. I'd love to turn it over to kind of more about your passions of Chia and just a general abstract. Why are you so passionate about Chia, and why is this the blockchain that you chose to develop on?
I can't say, I don't think I can say anything too nice without first saying something good about Ethereum, at least pre-merge. I was really intrigued by this idea that everybody could run a node, and uh, everybody could contribute to consensus, and um, that there was some provable cost, in terms of proof of work, or in the case of Chia, proof of space and time, to move the blockchain forward. And it was a really exciting thing to be a part of. But I also felt a little guilty about, even with my little 9 GPU farm on Ethereum, I felt bad that I was contributing to wastefulness and energy usage that didn't need to happen. And it was like at the time that Ethereum went to their merge, or we knew it was going to happen, uh, Chia was like the opposite in so many ways, while still having the things that I loved. And I love the energy efficiency, the novelty of the consensus, the way we've been able to get nodes literally all over the world, including war-torn countries. Um, and I stay excited because I have a low time preference, I guess. I think Chia will be in the top 10 market cap someday. I don't know what someday is, and I don't know how many of the current players will have been litigated into non-existence by then. We might be number 10 of 10 at that point, but I see the potential for some heavy real world adoption uh, through so many different projects. The Climate Action Data Trust, and uh, future things that I suspect will come in addition to things I'm participating in, like the real estate I mentioned. Uh, and I see Chia as the home for decentralization maxis. I think one of the things that's gotten so toxic in the crypto space is that so many people are chain maxis, but they're not maxis in any sort of deeply philosophical way. And I would like to do everything I can, and I see a lot of positive moves in the Chia ecosystem for maintaining decentralization and avoiding the centralizing forces that take away freedom and choice from people, and just really excited to be a part of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you actually touched on my last question right then and there, and I've not seen anything else come in from the community. So I'll give it just a minute while I'm doing my wrap up here. But thank you all for joining today. If you do have any last minute questions, feel free to put them into the Zoom Q&A or into the community feedback channel in Discord. And Lucky8, if you don't mind leaving us with some final thoughts as to, you mentioned where you see Chia in the future, but what are some things you have not touched on today that you really want to address in regards to Chia, the ecosystem, and development in Chia? It could be your own experiences, some of these future plans you have, but essentially, what are your last thoughts here?
Well, I'm just really glad and grateful that I found out about Chia when I did. Sure, it would have been nice to have a few terabytes of plots when mainnet launched. The FOMO was real. I missed Bitcoin. I missed mainnet launch on Chia, but the reality is, I think there's a lot of just amazing stuff happening. That's in a lot of ways a healthier ecosystem than what I've seen other places. Uh, we've had our squabbles, we've had different community issues, but for the most part, it's been largely void of drama, and people have, let the best ideas come to the top, and they've settled their disputes rationally, or rationally let them go, and they realized it wasn't worth pushing on anymore. And this community is just amazing, and the things we're creating individually and together uh, just have an amazing future, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. We have a truly amazing community, and it's great to be a part of for sure. And for anybody out there who wants to continue the conversation with Lucky8, you can get in touch with him on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. He is at Lucky8 Token. You can also find him in the Discord as at Lucky8 Token as well. I know he's in a number of the different servers there. If you have any follow-up questions for ourselves at CNI, feel free to jump into our Discord server and use that community feedback channel. Also, we hope to see you next week with our call where we will be interviewing Badger Miners, one of the new players in the pre-plotted drive and plotting as a service ecosystem. And thank you again, Lucky8. I really appreciate all you've done in this space. It's been a true pleasure working with you and getting to know you over the last couple of years. And thank you for taking the time today to let us learn more about you, your approach towards Chia development, and your experience in it as well. So thank you very much. And thank you to all who were able to join today and participate. We appreciate all the great questions and hope everybody has a wonderful weekend here. So thank you all.
Thank you.